All right, kids, gather round. We've got another classic today on Dad Does Books. I'm a dad, and I'm here to read you some books that I really like. Not like a teacher, not like someone on TV, like a dad. So kids, everyone, settle back and let me tell you a story. All right, we're going to do another classic. This book is about 200 years old. Well, the book isn't 200 years old. The story's 200 years old. It was written by a man named Washington Irving. The book is brand new, and I paid $1.50 for it at a dollar store. So let's settle in and hear the story of Rip Van Winkle. Many, many years ago in a small village in the Catskill Mountains lived a man named Rip Van Winkle. The Catskill Mountains are in New York State, if you don't know. I didn't know. I had to look it up just for this book, so it didn't seem like I didn't know what I was talking about. He was a simple, good-natured fellow with a wife, children, and a loyal dog named Wolf, which isn't confusing at all. But then again, once I had a cat named Tiger, so that's kind of the same thing. Rip was the sort of person who was always willing to help his neighbors. Whenever anyone needed a hand, Rip was more than happy to pitch in. What a good guy. He was also very popular with the village children. He always had time to play with them. It's important to make time to play. He made them toys, and he loved telling them stories. I love telling stories too. The children adored his fun games and his silly ways. And when Rip wasn't busy helping his neighbors or playing with the village children, he could be found resting under the shade of a beautiful tree, enjoying the summer breeze. Wow, this guy's got it made. Although, while Rip was really good at doing things for others, he was terrible at taking care of his own needs. In fact, his farm was known to be the worst in the whole area, and his house was always in a state of disrepair. He just needed to clean a bit more, spend less time napping. His wife eventually grew really frustrated with him, and was constantly telling Rip that there was work to be done. But Rip felt no urgent need to tend to anything. Yep, he just wanted to take a nap next to his dog. I know how that feels. Am I right, dads? In fact, to escape from work and the upkeep of his house, he would often go for long hikes in the mountain with his dog Wolf. Kind of seems like more work to get out of just doing the work in the first place. But you know what? Going for a nice hike is always a good adventure. One day, while he was enjoying a hike, he came across a little man with a long white beard. The man was dressed in old-fashioned Dutch clothes, so I guess he had buckles on his shoes, and he was carrying a keg that looked to be way too heavy for him. The man beckoned to Rip to come and help him carry the keg, and of course, Rip, being that kind and helpful guy that he is, he happily agreed. As he followed the man further up the hill, through the forest, Rip heard a sort of rumbling sound. It sounded like thunder. Soon they came to a hollow surrounded by tall trees and cliffs. There Rip saw many more men who looked just like the man he had followed. They all had funny beards and pointed hats and buckles on everything. They were all playing a bowling game called 9 Pins, and each time one of them rolled a ball at the pins, it sounded just like peals of thunder. That's a good word, peals of thunder. The jovial men were very friendly and insisted that Rip join them in a drink of their special brew from the keg. The brew was delicious, and after his first taste, Rip couldn't resist having a full cup, followed by another, and then still another. The little men were pleased that he liked it, and they let him have as much as he wanted. But the brew had a very heavy effect on Rip, making him feel tired. Although he knew that if he didn't get home soon, his wife would be really angry with him, but he couldn't help but sit and rest for a while by a tree. As he sat there, watching the little white-bearded men play 9-pin, he slowly drifted into a deep sleep, with Wolf and his rifle by his side. Okay, this story's kind of making me suspicious. I don't trust these little guys. I'm not sure what's in the brew. And lying down in the middle of the forest to take a nap is probably not the best idea because his wife doesn't know where he is. If you're going to go into the forest, make sure someone knows you're going. Tell people. That way if you don't come back on time, they'll come looking for you. Anyways, let's get back to the story. When he awoke, it was a bright sunny morning, and he was still in the exact same spot that he recalled having sat down in. However, when he put his hand down to pet Wolf, he noticed his dog was gone. He's probably gone off to look for something to eat, thought Rip. Then when he reached for his rifle, he saw that the metal parts had rusted away and that somehow it had been reduced to a stick. That's great. I wish more guns would turn into sticks. When Rip stood up, he realized that his joints were really stiff. He looked down and noticed that his clothes were all faded and torn. When he touched his face, he felt a beard, which, as it turned out, was very, very white and 2 feet long. Wow, what happened after I nodded off, he wondered. Did those little men play a trick on me? What happened? So Rip grabbed his old rifle and used it as a walking stick. He was determined to get back to the village to try to figure out just what happened. As he hiked through the forest, he wondered where all the familiar paths were. Things just seemed different, really different. When he arrived at the village, he was further puzzled. Not only did the village seem much bigger than before, there were lots of new buildings, and there seemed to be way more people. None of them he recognized, and they were all dressed in really strange clothes. Rip began to feel really worried, and he decided that the best thing to do was to just go home right now. He was probably in big trouble. But he got there, and sure enough, his house was there, only it was completely falling down. It looked like no one had lived there for years. What happened, thought Rip. Feeling sad and confused, Rip made his way to the village square, where people gathered around him because he was such a strange sight to behold. No one seemed to recognize him, so he said to the crowd, "I'm Rip Van Winkle. Does anyone remember me?" And as he tried to explain who he was, he noticed a young woman holding a small child. She looked kind of familiar to him. Rip asked her what her name was, and she said, "My name is Judith." "And what was your father's name?" asked Rip. "Why, it was Van Winkle, but he went away 20 years ago and has never returned." Rip understood right away that this woman was his daughter, only she had all grown up. He replied, "I'm your father. I don't know how to explain this, but 20 years ago I went for a hike, and after I drank some brew given to me by some little white-bearded men, well, I slept for 20 years. She was rightfully suspicious of this, but I guess after they worked out the details, she was happy that he was back, and happy to be finally reunited, they embraced. Judith told Rip that his brother was doing well, but sadly their mother, Rip's wife, had passed away. She invited Rip to live with them, and Rip gratefully accepted. After all, where else was he going to go? Back into the forest? Meanwhile, more villagers had gathered round, and one of them knew of the men that Rip had met in the woods. Everyone listened as he explained. Long ago, these men were Hendrik Hudson's crew, the explorer who discovered this region. Legend has it that every 20 years they magically reappear to check in on the land. Sometimes you can hear the thunderous sounds of their 9-pin game. But be wary of their generosity. If they offer you their special brew, don't drink it, for it'll put you to sleep for a very, very long time. "Well, now you tell me," says Rip. Happy to have finally solved the mystery of what happened, Rip Van Winkle spent the rest of his days living comfortably with his daughter and her family, visiting with his son, and getting to know all the new people in the village. Now that he was an old man, he could spend all of his time as he wished. He got himself a new dog and took long walks in the village before settling down to rest against nearby trees. All the villagers came to know him really well, and just like the old days, Rip was always willing to lend a helping hand to anyone in need. That's nice. It's important to feel useful. Most of all, Rip Van Winkle enjoyed playing with his grandchild and the rest of the village children. They couldn't have been happier than when Rip told them stories, taught them games, and made them toys. He was pretty good. He was like a grandpa to everybody. Silly old Rip. Rip made sure never to hike far up into the mountains again, especially if he heard the rumbling sounds of thunder, for fear that he might find the little men again and lose another 20 years. And that's the end. And that's the story of Rip Van Winkle, 200 years old, and I'm still not sure what the lesson was. Other than, well, maybe don't take things from strangers in the woods. Or if you're going into the woods, you should probably tell someone where you're going. So if you don't come back on time, they'll be able to go looking for you. That sounds like a really good lesson. If you'd like more information on this book, including where to buy a copy, make sure to check the description for details. While you're there, hit subscribe, and when a new story comes out, you'll be the first to know it. Until then, happy trails.